How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So, I just finished watching the first episode of Marvel's new show, What If? This episode chronicled the events of what if Agent Carter became a super soldier instead of Steve Rogers. And right off the bat, I gotta say the episode was pretty fantastic. Though while watching it, I noticed that there were quite a few changes that would drastically change the future of this version of the MCU. Now, while this episode is only a half hour, we got to see a lot of gigantic changes, besides the most obvious, which is Captain Carter. I'm gonna get into it today and show you guys how these changes in this episode can change the wider scope of this universe of the MCU as a whole. So, besides the most obvious, which is of course Agent Carter becoming Captain Carter, as you can see in the beginning, Colonel Phillips, who is played by Tommy Lee Jones in the First Avenger movie, apparently gets shot and dies right away in the beginning of this episode. Now, while that might not seem like such a big deal, of course, since he's never really shown up in the movies again, his character actually was one of the founders of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is, as you know, a gigantic part of the MCU. Now, it's not outright confirmed that he died, but since he wasn't in the rest of the episode, I'm going to say that he was either badly put out of commission or that he was killed. I'm gonna go towards more that he was killed, because even if he was out of commission, I'm pretty sure he would try to stay with the whole group. So with him out of the way, we instantly lose a founder of S.H.I.E.L.D. And the main people who founded S.H.I.E.L.D. in the first place were him and Agent Carter. And at the end of the episode, you know, since Peggy left for another dimension, of course, now we've lost two heads of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now that might be a gigantic change as to how S.H.I.E.L.D. started in the future. And of course that wasn't really such a huge deal, as at the end of the episode we see Nick Fury and Hawkeye there, so evidently S.H.I.E.L.D. did turn out okay. But they might have had more of a rocky start without two of their big figureheads in there. So maybe S.H.I.E.L.D. will be either more managed in the future of this universe, or less managed. So we really don't know, and hopefully we'll see in the future. Now, the next and biggest change for the future of this universe is that Howard Stark was able to experiment more on the Tesseract and be able to make Mark I Iron Man, basically. They call it the Hydra Stomper, but let's be honest, this is Mark I Iron Man. Now, this causes a lot of changes, since, you know, Iron Man existing in the 40s, pretty much. Now, Steve Rogers is still around, and will become somebody that Tony Stark knows, of course. And since Steve Rogers was basically the man behind the machine of the Hydra Stomper, he's basically the first Iron Man. And as we know from the end of Endgame, Steve Rogers is most likely going to live a very long life. And now that version of him might only have lived that long because of super soldier serum, but I'm gonna say that that's just naturally how long he lives. Meaning that by the time that Tony Stark actually becomes Iron Man, he might have a new Jarvis, just to say, which would be Steve Rogers telling him exactly what to do, because he was the first Iron Man, so he can help Tony go along the way as his own Iron Man. Meaning that Tony might have more experience and can always have a backup Iron Man just in case with Steve Rogers. And speaking of Iron Man suits, they would be far more advanced in this new reality. Since Howard Stark was able to use the Tesseract to experiment more on suits and armors, maybe he made a lot more armors back in the day, which maybe Steve Rogers got into to actually become the first Iron Man. So maybe Tony Stark would either take inspiration from Steve Rogers' variant of Iron Man, or he might go on his own path and not become Iron Man at all. Since we know how he feels about Steve Rogers in the present day anyway, so maybe he decides to pay homage to him, or he can go about on his own different path. Now, I'm pretty sure if Tony still got captured in the future that he would still make a version of Iron Man to be able to break out, but he might be able to make it much easier since he already has the tech for it. And he might become someone entirely different. Since he now has a probably Tesseract-powered different iron suit, he may be able to deal with threats insanely quickly. Now, Obadiah Stane might be a difficult challenge since he might also have had the tech to make a better Iron Man suit, but besides that, I feel like every other threat that Iron Man would fight in Phase 1 would go down to relative ease, since all of his suits would be ultra powerful. And when this comes full scale in the Avengers, he might have no problem fighting off against Loki or any of the alien threats that arrive. Since if Howard Stark was able to make something like the Hydra Stomper back in the 40s, and he passed on his knowledge in the future, Tony is definitely going to have stuff like nanotech probably way before Infinity War, which will be a huge help with the Avengers. And before we get back into the Avengers modern day, the last thing I have to touch upon is that Bucky will never become the Winter Soldier. Now, in the beginning, Bucky actually wasn't experimented on by Zola, which was kind of odd, but maybe in this reality he just didn't find a need to. And good thing Captain Carter saved him from falling off that train, since he was never experimented on, meaning that he probably would have died if he had fallen. But this time he never falls and he remains as Bucky Barnes and never becomes the Winter Soldier. Meaning that life would be a lot more simple for a lot of other people since there's no Winter Soldier. There might have been other Winter Soldier experiments happening, but without the very first one being Bucky Barnes, I don't really see the project going too far, meaning that we would never have any Winter Soldiers going about, which will be fantastic for the future. And with all that stuff changed in the past, we can now get to when Captain Carter arrived back in the present day. Now, Captain Carter seems to be a lot stronger and more skilled than Steve was as Captain America at this time. So she would most likely be a very good match against any of the aliens that are coming down. And since the only two Avengers changing would be Captain Carter and Iron Man with his more advanced suits, the aliens might go down a whole hell of a lot faster. And with the events of the Avengers out of the way, Captain Carter getting used to the modern day probably would go the same as Steve does. Except there would be no version of the Winter Soldier going on, since there is no Winter Soldier like we established before. Meaning that Peggy would just most likely become a soldier for S.H.I.E.L.D. and just go around doing a bunch of missions and stuff. Now when we get to the events of Age of Ultron, stuff might change drastically again. Since there is so much more powerful tech that Tony has at his disposal, maybe he already was able to create a successful Ultron. And with a good Ultron, we pretty much have our suit of armor around the world, meaning that there would really be no more conflicts anymore with a good Ultron. And I highly doubt Captain Carter would be against the Ultron procedure, since she basically loved the Hydra Stomper that Steve was riding, so I'm pretty sure she would have no issues with a new suit of armor going around to protect the world. And since there's a good Ultron, that means there would be no Age of Ultron, meaning that the Avengers would definitely stick together and there would be no civil war. We might still get the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver showing up, but I'm pretty sure the Avengers will be able to convince them to come good, and especially Captain Carter would definitely convince them herself. And since there would be no civil war, the Avengers would be much closer together as a unit. By the time Infinity War happens, I'm pretty sure all of the Avengers will be able to deal with Thanos in no problem at all. There might be a few casualties, but since the Avengers are all working together and we have a stronger Captain Carter and a lot more powerful Iron Man suits that Tony could definitely build for everybody else, I really don't see Thanos coming out on top in this version. So the future of this version of the MCU would be very beneficial for everybody. Everybody would be happy. Well, except maybe Captain Carter, since she wouldn't be able to spend her life with Steve. But besides that, life would be so much more peaceful for everybody around. So basically, yeah, if Peggy Carter did become Captain Carter, we would have had a much more bright future where we never would have had a snap, Bucky wouldn't have been brainwashed all his years, and the Avengers would have never disbanded. Everything to Falcon and Winter Soldier might not have happened since there's never a snap, so there most likely wouldn't be a bunch of people going around trying to make things how they used to be again. And everything with Loki would have never happened, so there'd be no time travel, and WandaVision most likely wouldn't happen since we never have a vision. So yeah, things definitely would have played out very well. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say on how the future of Captain Carter would have been. Thank you all so much for watching this video. It was kind of a blast to talk about and to speculate. You guys could probably clearly tell, but this video wasn't scripted at all. I just basically was going off stuff that happened off the top of my head. But yeah, it's pretty much all the changes I could think of. If you guys have any more changes that I might have missed, make sure to leave them down in the comments below so we can discuss them. So, thank you all so much for watching, and until we meet again, see you later!